Over the past few months, I've been just a little obsessed with Dune. And by that I mean I have been fully consumed by the world and the characters, and I just need more of it injected right into my veins. It's been quite a long time since I've had a hyperfixation that ran just this deep. The two films by Denis Villeneuve made me fall in love with the world, and I found myself craving more. And so I partook in an ancient practice that many people in my generation have lost the ability to do. I picked up a book. I know that's boomer humor, but I thought it was funny. I read the legendary sci-fi novel Dune by Frank Herbert and its follow-up, Dune Messiah. And so today, I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on the novel Dune and how it has affected my opinions on the two films made by Denis. Spoiler alert, the films are both still a 10 out of 10 for me, but now my opinions are a lot more informed by the book. And I'll probably be making at least a few more videos on the topic of Dune, but today I just wanted to give my thoughts on the novel as a whole and how it relates to the movies. And so obviously there's going to be spoilers ahead for the two films by Denis if you haven't seen them already, and of course scenes in the book that weren't included in the films. I won't be talking about Dune Messiah at all in this video, but I do want to make a video talking about the story of Dune Messiah because boy is there a lot to unpack there. Oh, dang it, I did it again. I never turned that light on. There we go, that's better. I noticed I didn't turn it on in my last recording either. I just feel like that space behind me is flat if I don't have the light on. And so with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and let's get into it. I want to start by saying that the writing in Denis' adaptation of Dune, in both Dune and Dune Part 2, is very interesting. A lot of the events are the same with some minor changes, but the dialogue is almost entirely rewritten. Now, on most occasions I would hear something like this and not be filled with confidence, let's be frank. But the dialogue in both films is so in line with the spirit of Dune, and in some ways it's almost an improvement on the dialogue in the book. Because man, let me tell you, Frank Herbert gets wordy. Denis himself has said that when he is crafting a film or just watching a film, he is far more likely to remember an image or a visual far more than a line or a word spoken. And this is a major departure from the book because let me tell you, Herbert loves to embellish. And so in Denis' films, a lot of that embellishment is stripped away, but it is still recognizable as Dune. And personally, I love this unique style of adapting source material, and I'm very interested to see what he does for Dune Messiah. And speaking of writing, I also have comments regarding Frank Herbert's writing style. Because while I really enjoyed the novel in itself, I have some comments about his writing style. The first thing you need to know if you haven't read the book is that it is written in the omniscient third person. This means that as the reader, we are privy to the thoughts and emotions of all the characters in a scene. We are not tied specifically to the subjective experience of one character. The story is obviously about the character Paul, but we also get to hear the thoughts and the motivations of the people around him. And this is really cool in most instances, although there are some major instances where it really spoils a moment for me. And the primary example for that is the surprise twist that is the betrayal of Dr. Yue. And in the movie, this is done very well. You don't necessarily know from context that the Duke is going to die, even if we do know about the plot of the Harkonnens and the Emperor against him. Although granted, as someone who had no interaction with the Dune franchise before watching the first movie, I did correctly guess that the Duke was going to die immediately after that very wholesome scene with Paul.
And if your answer is no, you'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be. My son.
As soon as he said that line, I knew he was gonna die. I'm not gonna lie. However, in the film, it's very effective. We hear this vague talk of a traitor in House Atreides, and then we get the surprise revelation that it was the Doctor. This is a plot point that I believe was absolutely butchered in the novel. See, in the book, we find out almost immediately that Yue is the traitor. In a scene between the Baron and Feyd-Rautha, he brags about the fact that he will destroy the Atreides and that the Doctor is going to do it for him. And then after this, you spend half the novel watching House Atreides be like, we know there's a traitor in our midst, but who could it be? It couldn't be Yue, that's impossible, it's not him. You see, in Dune lore, doctors like Yue were trained at the Suk Medical School, and it is there that they received imperial conditioning. It's not specified what this conditioning entails, but supposedly one of the effects of this conditioning is that it is both physically and psychologically impossible for a Suk doctor to harm a patient. So as it turns out, neither the Suk Medical School nor House Atreides thought of the idea of blackmail. That was it. That was the entire Harkonnen plan, is blackmail. All the Baron had to do was kidnap Yue's wife and torture her, and so that just immediately overrode all the conditioning. There are literally so many scenes in the novel where characters are like, there's a traitor, but it can't be the Doctor because blah blah imperial conditioning. So I guess in that way, he was the perfect traitor because literally no one suspects him. Lady Jessica, through her Bene Gesserit training, even sees Yue going around the house acting suspicious, but in her mind is like, no, it's not Yue. It can't be Yue. He has his imperial conditioning, and he hates Harkonnens. There's no deeper reason for that. There's no investigation that needs to take place into the disappearance of his wife. And because of this third-person narration style, every time Yue's in a scene, we always are privy to his thoughts of like, oh, woe is me, I have to kill all of House Atreides. And we're basically powerless to do anything about it. Literally, by the time of the destruction of House Atreides, the primary suspect for who the traitor is Lady Jessica. Like, ah yes, the Duke's concubine and mother to his only son. That's the traitor. She's the traitor. Now, I've harped on enough about that aspect of his writing style that I really didn't like, but there is other writing techniques that I really enjoyed. One of these is a narrative device that contributes to one of the many tragedies of the many characters in this book, and that is the fate of Princess Irulan, the daughter to the Emperor. I don't know if it's Irulan or Irulan. She do be rulin' though. Not really, but we'll see about that. You see, something that you may not know if you haven't read the book is that at the beginning of every chapter in the novel, there is a quote. These quotes are from various historical textbooks concerning the person of Muad'Dib. At the beginning of the book, we have no idea who this person is, but as we come to realize, Paul is Muad'Dib. It almost serves the same purpose as the Proverbs at the beginning of every episode of the Clone Wars. The actual quote is unrelated to the events of the episode, but tonally, it talks about the same message as the episode. It's kind of like that. I wrote down a list of all of the referenced historical textbooks in this book. I don't even know if I'm going to include this in the final video, I just thought I'd write it out. Beyond the individual quotes and their relevance to their chapters, the interesting thing to note about all these quotes is that all of these textbooks are written by the Princess Irulan. And from Dune Part 2, we also see an element of her fate as well. She begins as the daughter to the Emperor of the entire known universe. But by the end, she is just a pawn for the games of other powerful people. And just a side note, I love the costume choices for Princess Irulan throughout the film, because it also lends to the tragedy of her character and her journey from being a princess to a pawn. As throughout the movie, her costumes progressively cover her face until the point where we can barely see her. Just a little costume design thing that I thought was really cool. Paul dethrones her father and then is wed to her, not out of a sense of love or affection, but merely to establish himself as the new emperor. And then finally, at the end of the novel, we get the answer to the question that was nagging me throughout the book, and that was, why is the princess writing all of these books? Like, for real, we have to assume that she probably wrote even more textbooks than the ones that are mentioned in Dune. Now, for a little context, in the book, Chani takes Paul's proposal to the princess a lot better than she does in the movie. I have some thoughts about that, but I'm gonna get to that later. In the book, Chani becomes Paul's concubine in the same way that Jessica was Duke Leto's concubine in order to save his hand for a potentially strategic alliance through marriage. Now, it may seem like Chani is getting pushed aside in this deal, but Paul has no intentions on being with anyone other than Chani. The princess is merely just a pawn to the throne, and her fate is spelled out in the final paragraphs of Dune, the novel. Paul begins by saying, "We must obey the forms, yet that princess shall have no more of me than my name. No child of mine, nor touch, nor softness of glance, nor instant of desire." "So you say now," Chani said. She glanced across the room at the tall princess. "Do you know so little of my son?" Jessica whispered. "See that princess standing there so haughty and confident? They say she has pretensions of a literary nature. Let us hope she finds solace in such things. She'll have little else." A bitter laugh escaped Jessica. "Think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives." And that is the final paragraph of Dune. See, one of the nagging questions I had throughout my reading of the novel was why all of those texts were written by the same princess. And then finally, in the very final paragraph of the book, we get an answer. She writes all of these books because writing is her only consolation. She is now forced into a loveless marriage with a man who is just using her for her bloodline. And this is the fate of Princess Irulan, to spend the rest of her days writing away. The only comfort to soothe the fact that the next heir to the imperial bloodline will not come from her, but will be from a Fremen bloodline. The subject of her writings being the man who was born to the sea but raised in the desert. She writes about this monumental man who reshaped the entire universe, and the cost was her. This is a narrative device that I thought was extremely effective. I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not regarding the novel, but there are several moments writing-wise where Frank Herbert really cooks, and then there are other moments that make me think that all of the moments where he cooked were just a fluke accident. I swear, sometimes it feels like he just stumbles upon a bar, and it's just, I don't know. Another thing that I found interesting, having seen the movies first, was descriptions of the characters. How did the book describe them versus who was cast in the films? I still maintain that these films were casted perfectly. These are just my observations having read the book and compared the two. The first one is quite an obvious one, and that is the differences between Paul and Timothée Chalamet. Now, a lot of Paul's physical attributes are very similar. He is described as this very scrawny kid with long black hair, specifically charcoal. The book calls it charcoal hair. Now, the main and obvious difference is that at the start of Dune the novel, Paul is 15 years old, which I don't think Timothy's 15. He looks young, but he does not pass for 15. Nevertheless, I still maintain that he was perfectly cast. There is also the Duke Leto Atreides. Oscar Isaac brings all of the nobility, fierceness, and kindness that is exactly described in Dune the book. Now, one major difference is that in the book, I believe the Duke is described as having more narrow, almost hawk-like features, which is a far cry from the buff physique of Oscar Isaac. And then we have the Lady Jessica, which I thought was very interesting, because I specifically remember reading her physical description at some point in the novel and thinking to myself, this is just Rebecca Ferguson. I mean, the eye color is slightly different, but I can't really describe it, but just reading her description in the novel, I just pictured her, and it made sense. Some characters in the film look degrees different than they are described in the book, but Rebecca Ferguson, in my mind, was possibly the most perfectly cast member of this ensemble. And another character that I want to talk about is Duncan Idaho. From what little description we do get of Duncan Idaho, it kind of does sound like Jason Momoa, but I'm much more interested in his difference of characterization. And what I mean by that is, I liked his character a lot more in the movie than in the book. In the film, we spend a little more time getting to know Duncan Idaho and getting to see his personality. And to be fair, a lot of it is just Jason Momoa being Jason Momoa, but when he does act out his scenes, he really brings it. But in the book, Duncan has like one conversation with Paul, brings Stilgar to meet the Duke, gets drunk and complains about having to live on Arrakis, and then he dies. He still dies defending Paul, but at this point we've spent so little time with Duncan that I felt nothing when he died. This was one of those moments comparing the two together where I was like, yeah, Denis kind of cooked with this one. Another character that I thought was quite funny in this whole thing was Gurney Halleck. It's funny in the sense that after reading the book, I kind of felt bad for Josh Brolin, because whenever they described Gurney in the novel, it's like, oh, Paul's training, and then this ugly, hideous, old lump of a man blundered in. Like, the story can't go 2 seconds without calling Gurney ugly. It's so funny.
Smile, Gurney.
I am smiling.
Now moving on to the primary antagonist of the novel, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Not much description is given in the book regarding his appearance other than the fact that he is grotesquely overweight. What I mainly want to address in this video, very briefly for the sake of at least pretending to keep the channel family friendly, is that he is so much worse in the book. And I don't mean that he's written poorly, I mean that he is just a depraved man. He's definitely greedy and murderous in the film, but his evil goes even deeper in the book. There is a little bit too much description in the book for my comfortability level of his appetites. We're just gonna leave it at that. He specifically loves pursuits with people who don't want him, if you know what I mean. And it gets even worse from there, specifically regarding the age of the people he likes to insert himself upon. What can I say? Minecraft YouTubers would love him, Chris Hansen would hate him. That was an awful joke. I don't know if I'm gonna keep that in. He's terrible in the movies, obviously, but in the book, he is a lot more like John Wayne Gacy, if you know what I mean. And those are really all of the main people in the book that are described that I wanted to talk about, except for one who I'm going to talk about later, because it's important for a completely different reason. Now, one other aspect of film adaptations of books that always ends up happening because a movie can only be so long is all of the scenes from the book that end up on the cutting room floor, whether they are removed entirely or just altered in some way. And so I'm just gonna go through a list of some of the scenes that I think would have been amazing to see in live action. And by that I mean the scenes were so good that I would literally sit through like a 5-hour movie just to watch those. The first one I want to talk about, and the one that people who have probably read the books are anxious to hear my thoughts on maybe, is the dinner scene. Specifically, the dinner scene in the palace at Arrakeen. For those of you who don't know, Arrakeen is the name of the city where House Atreides lives on Arrakis. It is a dinner between the Atreides family and various bureaucrats and people involved in the spice trade. Among those present I'm just going to read this off. Among those present is Dr. Liet Kynes, Gurney Halleck, Duncan Idaho, a representative of the Guild Bank, the bank that has a monopoly on interstellar travel, a manufacturer of stillsuits and his daughter, a water seller, and a spice smuggler. Because smuggling is inevitably just gonna happen on a mining operation as big as Arrakis, so they want to keep the smugglers appeased too. And the full discussion during this dinner honestly deserves its own video. The actual conversation is relatively normal, but there is so much subtext underneath to unpack. The main source of this subtext is Paul and Jessica, who are both trained in the ways of the Bene Gesserit. For the purposes of this scene, that means they have the ability to pick up on minute gestures and body language from people around them. The slightest breath or gesture or blink of an eye can reveal a person's true intentions to a Bene Gesserit, and in this scene, it betrays everyone at the table. I may explain this scene at length in a separate video, but the main suspense of this scene comes from the realization from Paul and Jessica that many of the people in this room are Harkonnen agents. And so the entire time, Paul and Jessica are trying to get them to betray their intentions by directing the conversation in certain ways. Nothing's ever outright said, but the subtext is there. And I couldn't put my book down because during this scene, the balance of power shifts so many times to so many different people in this conversation. And it was also really cool seeing a room full of politicians and traders come to realize that Paul is not an ordinary 15-year-old. It's such a cool scene that I know would be very difficult to bring into the live action, but still, I would love someone to try. Another really powerful scene in the book that's lost in the film is the death of Dr. Liet Kynes. In the film, she's just killed by Sardaukar after helping Paul and Jessica escape. Although I do like the symbolism of water gushing out when she's killed instead of blood, in all practicality, the Sardaukar probably just hit like a water pocket in her stillsuit or something. But it's just a really cool Fremen Easter egg because blood for the Fremen is referred to as your life water or something like that, your life's water. I do love the symbolism in that scene and how she gives her water to Arrakis in the moments of her death. But the death of Kynes in the book is a lot better. I should mention for those who don't know, but Dr. Kynes in the book is a guy, so I'm going to be saying he. In the book, after helping Paul and Jessica escape, he is brought before the Baron, who decides that the best punishment for betraying him and allowing Paul and Jessica to escape is to give him to the desert without a stillsuit, which on Arrakis, as you probably know, is a death sentence. And so there's an entire chapter dedicated to his death in the book and how he slowly succumbs to dehydration and exhaustion in the desert. And during this scene, he becomes delirious and starts to hallucinate the image and the voice of his dead father, the original planetary ecologist for Arrakis, who planted in the Fremen the hope that Arrakis could be terraformed into this green paradise. But now the visage of his father comes to torment and berate Kynes in his final moments. And this is tragic in itself, but the true tragedy comes from his final revelation about Paul and the idea that he may have doomed the entire planet. Much like in the film, he comes to admire Paul and even consider the possibility that he could be the Lisan al-Gaib. And being a leader who is respected by all the Fremen, he told them to take Paul and Jessica into their society. But now, as he lays there dying in the desert, he has a revelation that I will read out here. A profound clarity filled Kynes' mind. He saw quite suddenly a potential for Arrakis that his father had never seen. The possibilities along that different path flooded through him. No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero, his father said. Reading my mind, Kynes thought, well, let him. The message has already been sent to my siege villages, he thought. Nothing can stop them. If the Duke's son is alive, they'll find him and protect him as I have commanded. They may discard the woman, his mother, but they'll save the boy. I think I said Keynes at some point in there. It feels more organic when I'm reading it to say Keynes, but when I'm saying the name in isolation, Kynes sounds better. This is the true tragedy of Dr. Liet Kynes. When his father became the ecologist of Arrakis, he gave the Fremen hope that in several generations, Arrakis could be transformed into a green, lush paradise filled with water. This hope gave the Fremen something to fight for, and it gave them the resolve they needed to push back the Harkonnens. It is this hope combined with the myth of the Lisan al-Gaib that planted the seed for radicalization within their culture, preparing them for some terrible purpose. Both Dr. Keynes, his father, and the Bene Gesserit have all sown their seeds, and now Paul is going to harvest them. In his final moments, he realized that the Fremen have been prepared for centuries to be radicalized by some messianic figure, and he realizes with utter horror that he was the one who delivered their Messiah to them. He may not have the gift of prescience or premonitions like Paul does, but in his final moments, he sees a great and terrible Fremen holy war, and he knows that he is the one who caused it. And there's no time to warn any of his people, any of the Fremen, because shortly thereafter, he would die. He would be unable to warn the Fremen of the danger that Paul really represented. And exactly what he feared in that moment does come to pass. After the events of the book and the films, the Fremen sweep across the galaxy, led by their prophet, who they revere as a god. Now, another major difference between the novel and the movies is that during Rabban's occupation of Arrakis, there is a 2-year time jump. During this time, Paul's sister Aaliyah is born. She is briefly played by Anya Taylor-Joy in Dune Part 2, but obviously in the book, she is 2 years old. And it is after she is born that we witness the true effects of Jessica drinking the water of life while pregnant. Oh hey, one of my friends is playing War Thunder. Nice, good for him. You see, the water of life is used to unlock the genetic memory of the entire Bene Gesserit history. This gives the current Reverend Mother the knowledge and the experience of the thousands of years of Bene Gesserit who came before her. And Aaliyah was exposed to this transformation while still in the womb, meaning before she was even born, she was awakened into consciousness with the knowledge and experience of thousands upon thousands of Reverend Mothers being flooded into her before she was even born. She was born a Reverend Mother, and as you've probably guessed at this point, she was not a normal child. She is feared by the Fremen children and their parents because while she talks with the voice of a 2-year-old, she says and knows things that no child should have knowledge of. She speaks with all the wisdom and cunning of someone decades older than her. Another really important change in the novel versus the movie is that it is a 2-year-old Aaliyah who kills the Baron. And this is really cool, especially the method of his death and the symbolism within that. In the book, Aaliyah kills the Baron with a Gom-Jabbar needle, the same needle that the Reverend Mother Gaius submitted Paul to in the movie and in the book. Now this is really cool symbolically. In the Gom-Jabbar test, a Reverend Mother is testing whether a person is a human or an animal. Meaning, will they resort to their base fight or flight instincts, or will they be able to control their impulses? And those who are judged to be animals are killed by the poison needle. And the Baron has demonstrated time and time again in the film, but especially in the book, that he is ruled by his animalistic urges. And so at the end of the book, a 2-year-old Reverend Mother arrives, judges the Baron to be an animal, and kills him according to Bene Gesserit tradition. That is a really cool piece of storytelling that I just love so much. Another major element of this time jump is that Paul and Chani have a son. a son that they name Leto II, after Paul's dead father, obviously. And during the final battle of the novel, which is the huge siege that we see in Dune Part 2, Paul and Chani's son is captured by enemy forces and killed. And as heartbreaking as that idea is, it really does feel like it has no impact on the story whatsoever. We never even meet his son, we just hear about him dying. So, like, it's sad, obviously, but you don't really feel anything. And that's all I really have to say about the time jump, is Aaliyah's born, and she's weird, and Paul and Chani have a kid, and he dies. Now, one scene, or rather one character, that was cut from the film that I thought would have been cool to see is that of Count Fenring. He doesn't really have a major role, so I see why he was cut, but I do appreciate his big moment. For context, in the novel, he is married to Lady Fenring, the woman that we see in Dune Part 2, so take that how you will. Moving on. He is also a very skilled assassin and a mentat. As a brief recap, mentats are the human computers who can process information at vast speeds. Tufir was one of them. I just rewatched Dune Part 1 last night, and I realized that they call him Thufir in the movie. No, that sounds wrong. It's Tufir. I know it's TH, but sometimes TH just makes the T sound. That's a hill I'm willing to die on. It is not pronounced Thufir Hawat. That sounds bad. That sounds wrong. It's Tufir Hawat. What was I talking about? Oh, right, Count Fenring. It is said that the Emperor Shaddam had no real friends, but Count Fenring was as close as the Emperor had to a true friend. And there is a scene after the siege of Arrakeen by the Fremen where the Emperor orders Count Fenring to kill Paul when he arrives. But when Paul gets there, the two make eye contact, an understanding passes between the two, and Fenring steps down. In this moment, Paul realizes that Count Fenring had been prepared by the Bene Gesserit for years as a potential Kwisatz Haderach, which is essentially the Bene Gesserit chosen one that they were breeding bloodlines throughout millennia to try and get. Paul was one of their prospects for Kwisatz Haderach, but it seems that Count Fenring was also one. However, the major obstacle that made it so that he wasn't the Kwisatz Haderach is that he is a genetic eunuch, meaning that his bloodline would not have been able to continue after that point. Because the Bene Gesserit didn't just want a Kwisatz Haderach, they wanted one that would be able to produce offspring and give way to a lineage of Kwisatz Haderachs. I'm saying this bad, I know. Neither Paul nor Count Fenring says anything, but a mutual respect is gained by the two when they realize the truth about each other. And Paul thinks to himself that had circumstances been different, him and Count Fenring could possibly have been good friends. That's really all that happens. I just thought it would be really cool to have Count Fenring there in the room and have Paul just be like, yo, we could have been bros in another timeline. Now, there is another moment in the books that I do think was done really well in the films. At least as well as you can do without having access to the internal monologues of characters. And that is the radicalization of Stilgar. Both in the book and in the films, Stilgar represents all of the damage that Paul is doing to Fremen culture. Even though Paul does adopt their culture and customs, still asserting himself as their messianic figure has dramatic repercussions for their way of life as a whole. As Dr. Kynes saw before he died, the Fremen were already pushed to the very brink by the Harkonnens, and all that it would take to push them over that edge is a hero or a messiah. Stilgar is the one who takes Paul in and trains him in their way of life, but always in the back of his mind is the idea that this boy could be their savior. They become close friends and hold a great deal of respect for one another. And after some time, Paul earns a reputation among the Fremen as Muad'Dib, their prophet and the greatest Fremen warrior alive. Paul is elevated to the point where no other Fremen has been. And there is a moment where this ascension reaches its peak. In the film, this happens in the scene with the Fremen Council, where Paul asserts himself as the rightful Duke of Arrakis and as the Lisan al-Gaib. But in the book, this happens after his military victory against the Harkonnens and against the Emperor. And in this moment, there's a very powerful scene where Paul looks into Stilgar's eyes and realizes that his friend is no longer there. In his place is a religious fanatic who is ready to go to war for him. In the book, Paul mentions the rains of his home planet, and Stilgar is awestruck at the very concept of water that falls from the sky. Not just shocked at the idea, but shocked in a religious sense. Water is so precious and rare on Arrakis that it is basically sacred, and Paul comes from a planet that is rich in this giver of life. And the rest of his thoughts are as follows. In that instant, Paul saw how Stilgar had been transformed from the Fremen Naib to a creature of the Lisan al-Gaib, a receptacle for awe and obedience. It was a lessening of the man, and Paul felt the ghost wind of the jihad in it. Jihad is an Arabic word. It's basically used to mean holy war in this series. I have seen a friend become a worshipper, he thought. In a rush of loneliness, Paul glanced around the room, noting how proper and on review his guards had become in his presence. He sensed the subtle, prideful competition among them, each hoping for notice from Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib from whom all blessings flow, he thought, and it was the bitterest thought of his life. And this is a great transition to talk about one of the many tragedies of Paul's character. At the very beginning of the book, Paul's prescience warns him of some terrible purpose that he may have been designed for or destined for. And after the death of his father, the Duke, exposure to the spice gives Paul more visions of this possible future, a holy war all in his name. This vision terrifies him, and he tries with all of his might to avoid it or stop it at all costs. At least he says in the book that he tries, but I read the book and I see no evidence of him trying to avoid this fate at all. And as the events of the novel unfold, Paul watches in horror as each event leads him closer and closer to the jihad. And even though he can see it coming, he seems to be powerless to change that fate. And by the end of the novel, he overthrows the Harkonnens and the Emperor and is worshipped by the Fremen people.
We await your orders, Lisan al-Gaib.
Lead them to paradise.
He radicalized an entire civilization to the point where they were willing to go to war with the universe whether he wants it or not. In trying to avoid these visions, he becomes the very thing that he was terrified of. Can you see why Anakin Skywalker was based on Paul Atreides? By all indications from him, at least in the book, he just wanted a peaceful life. If the Harkonnens hadn't attacked the Atreides, he probably just would have succeeded his father and ruled Arrakis as justly as his father had. And after the death of his father, he just wanted to disappear among the Fremen and live the rest of his life as one of them. It is the enemies at work, as well as the friends and family around Paul, that continue all of these events to where they end up. Things spiral to the point where he is forced to ride this wave of death and destruction that everyone made for him. The way was prepared and he had no choice but to take it. Another interesting aspect about Paul that doesn't really get delved into too much in the movies is just how OP he is as a character. To start off, he was trained by his mother in the Bene Gesserit way. He can use the power of the voice as well as read the expressions and the body language of people around him. Even environments around him can betray purpose and intention. In the dinner scene, he correctly identifies all of the Harkonnen agents in the room and manipulates them into showing their hand. He is also trained in combat and self-defense by Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho. It's definitely implied in the film, but it's explicitly stated in the book that Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho are potentially the two most powerful warriors in the universe. They are quite possibly the best fighters in the whole Imperium. The whole reason that the Emperor wanted the Atreides dead was because under the training of these two warriors, House Atreides was becoming strong enough to potentially rival or even surpass the Emperor's Sardaukar. And Paul grew up being trained by both of them in combat, and as a result, in the book it's said that he is possibly the most powerful fighter, the most skilled warrior in the Imperium, surpassing not only the Sardaukar, but also the Fremen. I haven't mentioned this at this point, but it's canon to the novel that the Fremen are better fighters than the Sardaukar. But you probably knew that from watching the movie or reading the book. I don't know who's watching, but I hope you're enjoying the video so far. I can't see you, but I hope you're enjoying. Or can I see you? Something to think about. He also has prescient abilities that allows him to peer into multiple futures. This, in combination with his Bene Gesserit training, allows him to manipulate the people around him to fit these futures. And finally, this is not mentioned in the films at all, but Paul also has Mentat capabilities. And in a conversation with his father, the Duke, Leto reveals that he does think that his son has Mentat capabilities. And it's a really funny moment in the book because Paul's immediate reaction to this is to start essentially reciting verbatim the Wikipedia definition of Mentats, and then he realizes what he's doing and he's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense actually. So now we have a character who is the strongest fighter in the universe, who has been trained in the cunning and manipulation tactics of the Bene Gesserit, can see into the future, and can process all of this in the time it takes a normal human to blink. There is a moment in the desert after the destruction of House Atreides where both the stress of this event and the exposure to the spice causes all of these abilities to activate for Paul at once. He starts seeing billions upon billions of possible futures in split seconds, each being recorded by Paul's Mentat abilities. He is caught up in a storm of thought, not overwhelmed by it, but processing it. It's like going to the beach and memorizing with photographic capability every single grain of sand on that beach.
Somebody help me, please.
Jessica, at this moment, for the first time, looks upon her son and the cold certainty with which he speaks, and for the first time in her life, she is terrified at what he may be capable of. Through a combination of his aristocratic upbringing, his many trainers throughout his life, and his own genetic abilities, Paul may just be the most powerful being in the universe. And in closing, I want to talk about a major difference between the book and the films, and how it is done through the experience of a single character. A character who I have reserved talking about until here at the very end. In an interview, director Denis outlined that one of the major changes he was making in his adaptation of Dune was correcting a mistake in the original novel. See, many readers came away from the first book viewing Paul as a hero. People bought into this idea that he was some kind of chosen one. In actuality, Frank Herbert wanted to portray Paul much more as an outworlder and a politician, someone who uses the Fremen to radicalize them into his own personal army to conquer the universe with. But when he realized that people were still on Paul's side after reading Dune, that is when he wrote Dune Messiah, a story about the god emperor and tyrant Paul Atreides, and how his empire has transformed the entire universe. Denis Villeneuve knew this, and as a result was able to tell the story that Herbert wanted people to understand. A story where Paul is much more of an anti-hero, if at all a hero. And the main way that he did this, which I thought was brilliant, was by completely rewriting the character of Chani. See, Chani in the novel suffers from the same condition that all women characters written by men in the 60s do. Her role in the book, in Dune, is to immediately fall in love with Paul, give him a child, and then stay at home and look after the child. And that's it. There are a few odd paragraphs in the novel about how tough she is and how Paul trusts her implicitly on matters of security, but she is largely just shoved into the role of a housewife. So not only is her character improved upon in Denis' adaptation of Dune, but she also serves as a vehicle for the audience to watch Paul's fall from grace. Firstly, he created the dynamic where the south of Arrakis is filled with religious fanatics who worship the Lessening, people like Stilgar, whereas the Fremen in the north are mainly freedom fighters who would rather see a leader come from the Fremen, people who realize that messianic figures are used as a means of control. See, in the novel, there's no such divide. All of the Fremen just immediately start worshiping Paul as their prophet and god. It's very white savior in the most uncomfortable way. But it's meant to be uncomfortable. This was a warning against messiahs and white saviors and stuff like that. Remember what I said in my first video on Dune, that there's no allegory or symbolism at all to be found in Dune, and that it's just a straightforward sci-fi project? That was a lie. I lied to you. I just realized some of you may not have seen that original video. I wasn't actually meaning that. That was sarcasm. Chani represents all the Fremen who realize that the Fremen in the south may be substituting the Harkonnens for just another tyrant. Initially, she falls for Paul because he does not want this role. All he wants to do is to fight the Harkonnens alongside her and learn the Fremen way. However, destiny catches up to him and he is led into drinking the water of life. One thing I really love about the water of life, particularly in Dune Part 2, is the idea that if you drink it, you die. In a literal sense, neither Jessica or Paul die, but in another sense, they do die. When Jessica drinks it, she comes back as someone who is unrecognizable as Paul's mother. And when Paul drinks the water of life, he becomes someone who is no longer the man that Chani fell in love with. And from this point onwards, the distance between the two of them grows larger. She does still seem to care about him, but she also grows to hate the person that he has become. Not only is this heartbreaking, but in this new role, Chani represents how we, the audience, are meant to feel about Paul's transformation, as we progressively begin to view him more and more through her lens. And in the end, Paul does get his holy war, and Chani will have no part of it. And with that, we have all of my thoughts on Denis' adaptation of Dune and how it was informed by my enjoyment and experience reading the novel. I'm not gonna lie, this is not the last time I will talk about Dune on this channel. Far from it. It's been a long time since I've sunk my teeth into this kind of series with an extensive lore, and I am very excited about it. I'm also excited and very nervous to see how Denis is going to tackle Dune Messiah. I'll probably make a video soon on the book Dune Messiah, but let me just say right now that Dune Messiah gets crazy. You thought Frank Herbert was on cocaine in the first novel? You don't know cocaine until you've read Dune Messiah. And then there's probably someone who's read more of the books than me who's like, you have not known cocaine unless you've read like God Emperor of Dune or something. I am planning on reading more. I took a bit of a break after Dune Messiah because, no spoilers, but man, that ending is just so good, and I don't want to revisit Dune until I just let that sink in. I also plan on making a video on the 1984 adaptation of Dune by David Lynch, because I watched it not too long ago, and man, do I want to roast it so bad. It's horrible. It's awful. I have much more Dune content coming in the future, and I hope you're excited for that, because I certainly am, because I'm obsessed. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Also, thanks for allowing me to take a break from posting videos. A friend of mine was getting married, and so it was great to be able to just step away for a bit and to celebrate that with him, and it was amazing. And I also hope you enjoy videos of me talking about the books that I'm reading. It had been a long time since I last read a book, but after watching Dune and Dune Part 2, I knew I just had to get into the Dune series. And because of that, I rediscovered my love of reading, and I've gone through several books at this point after Dune Messiah. And so sometimes I may feel the need to talk about the books that I've read and the stories within those, just like I've talked about movies on this channel. If you haven't noticed, movies are my main thing here. But I may also start doing more like book reviews, not reviews, but like, you know, commentary videos, but on the books I read. And I don't know when this video's coming out, but I've started live streaming again, or will start live streaming very soon. By the time this video goes up, I'll probably have already started live streaming again. Here's the card that I made for that. Really cool, right? I love the VHS aesthetic. I post my streaming schedules for each week on my community tab, so if you are subscribed, make sure you have post notifications on so that you get notified and can, you know, see when I'm going live. And it was at this point in the video that I started to talk about what live streams I'm going to be doing on my YouTube channels and which live streams I was going to be doing on my Twitch channel, which for those of you who don't know, I do have one. However, I'm making this little note afterwards while I'm editing the video because YouTube hates me. Not the whole platform, but specifically YouTube Live. I have tried numerous solutions to try and fix my inability to go live. Whenever I hit the go live button on a YouTube live stream, they just say that they're not getting video for whatever reason. The video just isn't there. And I have tried so many different things to try and fix this. And so to reduce confusion, and because YouTube lives just aren't going to be happening apparently, all of my live streams from here on out will be taking place on my Twitch channel because yes, that still works. I was really hoping to be able to do some live streams even on this YouTube channel where we would, like, you know, watch videos together, and we still will. It'll just have to be on my Twitch channel rather than this channel. So thank you so much for listening to this video. I'm gonna pass it back to me in the past, but just know that all of my live streams from here on out will be happening on my Twitch channel. And as for the patrons and our weekly streams, I'll get back to you on that. I'm still trying to figure out a solution to this predicament. Speaking of the patrons and what those streams entail, let me kick it back to me in the past. These are available to all paying members on the Patreon. I get to hang out with all of the patrons who support this channel and let them know the big projects that I'm working on, some of which I don't talk about on my public channels, because I've got a lot of great ideas coming in the future at some point, and I just love to be able to tell my patrons about it. Speaking of which, thank you to my patrons, Sean, Happy the Knife, and my top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you all so much for continuing to support me and also allowing me to step away from content to, again, go to my friend's wedding and just have a great time. It means the most. You're all the best, and thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for watching. We are nearly at 5,000 subscribers, which is crazy. The amount of growth that this channel has had in half a year, even less than that, is truly insane. And so thank you all for it. You deserve the credit. I'm just making the videos, but you're all watching them, and I think that's really cool. And so with all that said, thank you so much, and I will see you next time for another video. I hope you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.